Do you know, daughter, who you are and who I am? If you know these two things, you will have beatitude within your grasp. I am he who is, and you are she who is not. These are the words that God spoke to St. Catherine of Siena during one of her many ecstasies. But if you know anything about Catherine of Siena, you will instantly feel the tension within them. Looking at her legacy, you'll see a woman who is not only not nothing, she's full of greatness. As a young Italian woman living in a patriarchal society during the 1300s, Catherine wielded extraordinary influence and power, leading her to counsel both popes and kings. Throughout her short 24-year life, Catherine made notable contributions to diplomatic efforts in resolving conflicts between different Italian city-states. She played a pivotal role in convincing Pope Gregory XI to restore the papacy back to Rome from Avignon, France, and she helped heal a church that was divided by two competing popes. Catherine cleansed and comforted countless sick people during the Black Death plague, and she left behind the Dialogue, which remains one of the greatest spiritual works of all time. Since then, she's not only been canonized a saint, she's been elevated as a declared doctor of the Church, making her one of the first women ever to receive that title alongside Teresa of Avila, another incredible saint. So that's not nothing, right? You would agree? But God is also not a liar. So how do you reconcile those two things? The bedrock of Catherine's greatness does not lie in her intelligence, her charisma, her powerful acquaintances. Her greatness is precisely in her deep knowledge of her nothingness and her willingness to embrace that without offense. Listen to her in her own words. She says, God's true holy servants recognize that all they have is from God alone, and they are conscious of their own nothingness. Now understand the absolute terms in which she says that. Again, God's true holy servants recognize that all they have is from God alone, and they are conscious of their own nothingness. If we want to understand the wisdom in today's word, that is the mystery that lies at the center. So Jesus said in the gospel, and again, tune your ear to the absoluteness of his word. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. Now pair that with the earlier statement of today's gospel. All things have been handed over to me by my Father. When you put those statements together, the takeaway is that access to the Father comes exclusively through Christ. There is no other way. And we know that the Father is love. He is hope. He's wisdom, peace, abundance. He's the very anchor of being itself and the font of eternal life. And so if we want to approach him, to know him, to live in relationship with him, there is no other way than Christ. I can't do it on my own power, and neither can you. There is no self-help guru, prescription pill, or New Age spirituality that is going to deliver on those goods. There is only Christ. But here's the rub. What do we know about Christ? He's the one who from eternity empties himself out. He becomes, if you allow me this language, nothing. Zechariah in today's first reading describes him. He says, "See, your king is coming to you, meek and riding on a donkey." This is very underwhelming, let alone unexpected. But St. Paul puts it the strongest in his letter to the Philippians. He says, Jesus, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God something to be grasped, but rather emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of men. Well, think about what that means for us in our own relationship with Christ. Not only do we have to come to Christ, but how we come to him matters. If we approach Jesus with hearts that are unrepentant, self-sufficient, apathetic to the power and the urgency of the gospel, by just, for example, leaving sins unconfessed for decades, picking and choosing the tenets of the faith that we like and leaving the rest behind, or delaying the conversion which the gospel is seeking to yield from us as its ultimate fruit, well, then it doesn't matter how smart, how talented, how educated any of us are, because Jesus can't help someone like that. We can't access the Father without him. And this is the issue when Jesus says this prayer to the Father in today's gospel. That's the very thing he's responding to. Immediately before it, he's condemning cities that he couldn't help because they didn't recognize their need for him. And so he says in today's gospel, Father, you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, but you have revealed them to the little ones. It's all about our nothingness, because children have nothing. They are totally dependent on their parents. Also, side caveat here, there's nothing wrong with being smart or having knowledge. The church gave the world universities. We literally invented them. The greatest philosophers of the medieval period were Catholic priests and bishops. That's not the issue. The issue is our tendency in the spiritual life to stand aloft as if Jesus was somehow like a dispensable means to the Father, as if we weren't totally dependent on him. When we do this, and sometimes I don't know that we always know we're doing that, in effect, we relate to Jesus the way a critic would to a painting, from a vantage of separation, of assumed superiority, rather than the disposition proper to the Christian life, which is closer to that of a patient who receives a doctor, which, in other words, is a position of acknowledged need. So, Catherine's greatness was not a contradiction of what God's words were saying. It was, in fact, the fulfillment of them. The more deeply she understood that she was she who is not, the more room there was for God, he who is, to act through her. And that same principle is true for us. That is the heart of today's word. And so I urge you, pray this week with Catherine's lesson in your own hearts. Lord, help me know who you are, and help me know who I am. Because when we know these two things, we discover that our nothingness is not the end of the story. It is the very place where God's life, God's power, and God's love begins.